My name is Naomi Reyes, though most people call me Nomi, and I am 34 years old. Last Tuesday, everything I thought I knew about my life snapped like a thread when I checked a lottery ticket and realized I had just won $47 million. My hands trembled so hard I almost dropped my phone as 6 numbers blinked back at me in perfect alignment, and after the first wave of dizziness and wild laughter subsided, a single, stubborn thought cut through the noise. I would tell absolutely no one about this money, not my family, not my coworkers, not even my closest confidant. If you're watching this, say hello in the comments and tell me where you're tuning in from. And before I explain the decision that changed everything, hit like and subscribe to Shadows of Regret, because the story you're about to hear, about loyalty, boundaries, and the price of pretending, might make you look at your own relationships in a very different light. Before that Tuesday, my life in Denver felt painfully ordinary. I worked as a senior accountant at a boutique tech consultancy called BrightArc, living in a tidy one-bedroom near City Park, paying bills on time but never feeling safe, waking at 6 a.m. to make black coffee in a chipped ceramic mug, then riding the bus with headphones in while my mind tabulated rent, utilities, groceries, student loans, the practical math of a life lived on the edge of almost enough. 60-hour weeks were standard during audits. My boss, Harold Klein, had a habit of rolling my ideas into his slide decks and presenting them with his name on the title page. And my coworker Trent took long lunches and slipped out early, leaving messes I quietly fixed. The tension in my jaw never fully unclenched, and when my 10-year-old Honda Civic squealed in the rain, I turned up the radio and prayed. My family situation was a maze. I had long since learned to walk with my eyes half closed. My parents, Miguel and Ruth, divorced when I was 14 and remarried within 2 years. My father, a community college physics lecturer who dreamed in equations, married Veronica, a boutique realtor with glittering nails and a taste for renovations we were always about to afford. My mother married Leonard, a successful logistics executive whose generosity was a rumor that never reached me. I have 2 siblings, but the dynamics were tilted from the start. My younger sister, Aria, 30, a pediatric nurse with a perfect smile, a surgeon husband named Daniel, a new craftsman home in Littleton, and 2 photographic calendar children. My older brother, Marco, 36, charming, clever, and permanently one step short of reliable, who could turn the phrase, "I'll pay you back," into a lullaby. The pattern with him never changed. Frantic calls, breathless apologies, solemn vows, then silence until the next catastrophe. The extended cast was its own constellation. My aunt Celia, my mother's kid sister, an elementary school librarian who smelled like paper and peppermint and drove an ancient Subaru that coughed at red lights, who remembered birthdays without Facebook and folded $5 bills into origami cranes when the world felt cruel. And in opposition, my father's older sister, Aunt Lorraine, who married wealth and wore it like a mirror to make the rest of us flinch. Her son, my cousin Nate, learned entitlement the way other kids learned piano, and somewhere along the line he found blackjack and never quite put it down. Money in my family was a story written in IOUs. 3 years ago, I emptied my emergency fund to send Marco $5,000 for rehab, but months later I learned he had never checked in. When Aria needed extra cash for wedding upgrades, I put $2,000 on my credit card and set a reminder for a repayment that never came. When Dad's roof needed help after a hailstorm, I wired what I could and smiled at Cancun photos that appeared on Veronica's page a month later. Drinks lifted toward a blue horizon. The only person who knew all of it was my best friend, Priya, whom I'd met in college when she offered me her last granola bar during finals week. She's a night shift nurse and a realist who believes in kindness and budgets, and whenever my heart grew hard, she would sit me down, pour tea, and remind me that boundaries aren't punishment. Buying lottery tickets was my tiny rebellion. $10 every Friday at Patel's Corner, where Mr. Patel greeted regulars by name and kept a jar of butterscotch on the counter. My mother called it a tax on hope. My father muttered probabilities. Marco suggested I save time and give him the cash, but I kept playing because holding a ticket let me imagine a life where surprise didn't mean danger. I had quiet dreams. Travel that wasn't visiting someone else's guest room, a master's degree in forensic accounting, an emergency fund so solid that a burst pipe would be an annoyance instead of a crisis. Instead, I balanced coupons and clipped meals, knew which store had the best price on paper towels, and calculated during dinners whether I could afford dessert without inviting dread. All of that sat inside me like a drawer I never opened until the day the drawer slid out on its own. It was my birthday, a Tuesday, and after Harold presented my cost savings model as his in a client pitch, I stopped by Patel's and instead of my usual quick picks, I chose numbers I could hold. My birthday and month, my mother's birthday, my father's Aunt Celia's Priya's. I went home to a solo celebration, leftover pad thai, a single cupcake from the cafe by the bus stop, and a glass of the cheap Cabernet Priya had wrapped in tissue paper. The drawing passed in the background of my scroll until 8:30, when I peeked at my phone and saw the first number match, then the second, then the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth. I checked the state site, rewound the video, said no way into an empty room, and then laughed and cried at the same time. The website said I was sole winner, $47 million, after taxes something like $28 million, a number so large it made my brain short-circuit. I didn't sleep. I read for hours about winners whose lives blew apart. Cousins invented by need, marriages shredded by envy, bankruptcies wrapped in Bentleys. By dawn I had decided I would claim the money through a shield and tell no one. I called in sick for the first time in 3 years and made an appointment with an attorney named Elena Park in a downtown tower whose lobby smelled like new carpet and quiet power. I sat across from her, holding my tote like a parachute, and placed the ticket on her desk. I want to do this without anyone knowing it's me, I said. She examined the ticket, didn't flinch, and explained blind trusts, tax strategy, and the first rule. Do not tell people before you have guardrails. She referred me to a fiduciary advisor named Marcus Toombs, and together over 2 weeks we set everything up. The Redwood Heron Trust to claim the prize, a conservative investment plan, a charitable foundation skeleton, and a small personal account so my spending looked normal. I kept going to work, kept nodding in meetings, kept driving the Honda, but the secret buzzed under my skin like static. I found myself wondering about my family. Would they be glad for me if they knew, or would I become a wallet with legs? And the questions wouldn't stop. One night at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, I had a thought that felt like an answer and a trap. What if I tested them? Not with anything grand, just a single, honest ask. I would tell each the same story. My company shuttered after losing our biggest contracts. My last paycheck was delayed pending investigation, and I needed $5,000 to cover rent and medical bills from some concerning tests. Specifics prepared, emotions in check. Priya, when I told her, frowned and said, "Naomi, that's a game that can hurt you." And I said, "Maybe, but I'm done guessing in the dark." And she said she'd stand by me even if she didn't love the plan. I made a list. Mom and Leonard, Dad and Veronica, Aria and Daniel, Marco, Aunt Lorraine and Cousin Nate, Aunt Celia. I also added 2 names I usually didn't lean on. My neighbor, Mrs. O'Leary, a retired music teacher who bakes zucchini bread for the building, and my colleague Brianna, who always compliments my shoes but once threw me under a bus in a status meeting because I wanted a wider mirror. I started with Mom. She sounded flustered, asked about unemployment, reminded me gently that Leonard had just put a deposit on a mountain cabin and they were cash light, suggested I check with Dad or Aria, and promised to talk to Leonard, but no promises. Dad's response at a coffee shop was a seminar on personal finance. He asked where my 6-month cushion went, listed subscription services I should cancel, and concluded that dipping into their retirement would be irresponsible. Veronica chimed in later via text, suggesting I reassess my lifestyle, which was rich coming from a woman who named her handbags. Aria welcomed me into her new kitchen that gleamed like a magazine, made me a latte with a machine that cost more than my car, said, "Oh my God, poor you," and then explained that between private school tuition, the new SUV, and their master bath remodel, there just wasn't liquidity right now, though maybe they could help with a smaller amount. Or I could move into their guest room once we clear out Daniel's gym equipment. Marco sent, "Dang, sis, brutal, I'm strapped, call you later," and never did. Aunt Lorraine told me this was why I should have gone into banking and suggested a Dave Ramsey podcast. Nate scheduled lunch to hand me a check, canceled an hour before, then stopped answering. Brianna gave me a long hug, said she'd check with her fiancé, and ghosted. Mrs. O'Leary, despite being outside the family experiment, heard me in the hallway on the phone to the landlord and slipped an envelope under my door that night with a note. "In case this helps, pay it forward someday." And inside was $200 in 20s and a Starbucks gift card. And then, before I could even reach out, my phone rang. "Aunt Celia, honey, your mom mentioned the job thing. Are you okay?" she asked. We met at a diner near her library. She ordered soup, pressed napkins flat with her fingertips the way she always did, and listened. When I finished, she said, "Family helps family," and slid an envelope across the table. It held $3,000 and more love than paper should carry. "It's not the whole thing," she said, "but it's a start. And if you need a place to land, my sofa pulls out." My throat burned. Later that night, I learned via a mutual friend that Celia had been rationing test strips for her type 2 diabetes since the copay went up, and tutoring after school to cover utilities. She gave anyway. The contrast cut me open. I invited her over and told her the truth. I hadn't lost my job. I had been testing the family. She was quiet, then said, "I'm not mad. I'm sad you felt you had to do this, but I understand." And then I told her the rest. About the lottery, the trust, the plan. She blinked, laughed a watery laugh, and said, "Well, that explains the calm in your eyes." And then she said the sentence that changed me. "Money reveals us. To others and to ourselves." I told her I wanted to help with her health costs in future. And she said, "I don't need anything but to know you're safe," which of course is exactly why I insisted. I met with Elena and Marcus and established the Sparrow Lane Trust for Celia, a quiet monthly stipend, medical coverage, and a rule that she never needed to ask. I set the bones of a nonprofit too, the Lantern Project, to support isolated seniors with home repairs, companionship, and small grants. I kept my day job just long enough that no one could point to a sudden change, and then I called a family meeting. Everyone came. Mom with a pan of store-bought brownies she plated as if she'd baked them. Leonard with a watch that caught the light. Dad with a folder as if I'd asked for a review. Veronica in heels that clicked judgment. Aria with her phone buzzing. Daniel checking sports scores. Marco 10 minutes late and already apologizing. Aunt Lorraine with a trained frown. Nate shadowing her. And last, Celia, whose smile I wore like armor. I told them I'd landed a better-paying role. Technically true, I'd appointed myself executive director of the Lantern Project at a reasonable salary, and that I was fine. They exhaled in visible relief, a room released from obligation. Dad asked why I'd asked around for money if I had a solution lined up. I said, because I thought family was a net, and he looked away. I thanked the ones who had offered non-financial help and noted gently the silences. Marco muttered something about bad timing, and I said, "There's never a good time to be there for someone," which no one contradicted. I didn't tell them about the win. Not then, not later. Afterward, Celia stayed to help wash cups. "That was brave," she said. "It felt like breathing," I said, and it did. In the months that followed, my life changed shape without changing its soul. I moved to a modest 2-bedroom with sunlight and a small balcony for basil plants. 3 blocks away, we bought Celia a 1-story cottage with wide doorways and a porch swing. The Lantern Project opened quietly and grew louder. We fixed stairs, installed grab bars, set up weekly calls, and matched retired carpenters with elders who needed shelves. Priya became our outreach lead between shifts, and my neighbor Mrs. O'Leary taught a sing-along once a month in the community room. I still saw my family, but the air was different. Polite calls on birthdays, holidays with edges sanded, no longer a theater of performances about closeness that never was. Marco occasionally pitched me on can't-miss business ideas. Aria complained about cost overruns on a kitchen island that could seat 8. Dad had a minor heart scare, and, through a hospital fund, an anonymous donor covered a bill he couldn't quite manage. When Nate finally checked himself into a gambling program, a scholarship appeared. They never asked where the help came from. I didn't tell them. Sometimes at night, I think about the version of this story where I announced the win on day 1. In that branch of time, I imagine I'm showered in congratulations, group texts bloom, and under the bouquets lies a ledger that never balances. I prefer this life, smaller in some ways, and truer in all the ones that matter. Money didn't change who anyone was. It spotlighted it. It taught me that boundaries are an expression of love for yourself and, paradoxically, for the people who can't meet you where you are. Celia says the wind didn't make me brave, it just removed the last excuse not to be. Sometimes we sit on her porch with iced tea and watch evening arrive, and I feel a peace that has nothing to do with numbers on a screen. Recently, I ran into Mr. Patel at the store, and he joked that I must be due for a lucky ticket. I smiled and bought a pack of peppermint gum. We're building something steady here, porch by porch, stair by stair, and the secret hasn't made me lonely. It's made me honest. If you've ever wondered whether someone would show up for you without a spotlight, you aren't alone. I learned that the people who deserve a seat at your table aren't the ones who toast you when the champagne is cold and plentiful. They're the ones who show up with soup when all you have is an empty bowl. Have you ever tested someone's loyalty on purpose or by accident? What did it teach you? Tell me in the comments. And if this story nudged something in you, tap like, share it with a friend who needs a reminder that their worth isn't measured in what they can give away. And subscribe to Shadows of Regret for more true-to-life stories about drawing lines, choosing yourself, and loving the people who love you back.